Everyone knows the face of Abraham Lincoln, the tall, gaunt figure with the towering stovepipe hat, the solemn eyes, and the rugged features, is one of the most recognizable images in all of American history. He is remembered as the 16th president, the man who held the Union together through its darkest hour, the leader who signed the Emancipation Proclamation, and the tragic victim of assassination at Ford's Theater. But behind that familiar image, there may have been a secret that even most Americans don't know. Abraham Lincoln might have been hiding a rare illness, something that explained not only the way he looked, but also the struggles he carried inside. And the doctors of his time, bound by the medical knowledge and the taboos of the 19th century, never shared the truth. To understand this mystery, you first have to look closely at the man himself. Lincoln was unusual from the very start. He was incredibly tall for his era, standing 6 feet 4 inches, when the average American man was barely 5 feet 7. His limbs seemed disproportionately long, his hands and feet unusually large, his face narrow, his jaw prominent, and his posture slightly awkward. When people met him for the first time, they often described him as odd-looking, even ungainly. Though once he began to speak, his charisma seemed to overshadow his appearance. Still, that appearance has fueled decades of speculation. Was Lincoln's body shaped the way it was simply by nature, or was there something else at work? For much of the 20th century, the leading theory was that Abraham Lincoln suffered from a rare genetic disorder called Marfan syndrome. Marfan affects the body's connective tissue, the substance that holds organs, blood vessels, bones, and muscles together. People with Marfan tend to be very tall and lanky, with long arms, long fingers, and flexible joints. They can also develop serious heart problems, since the connective tissue in the aorta, the body's main artery, can weaken and tear. Lincoln's height, his gangly frame, his large hands, even his slightly sunken chest, seemed to fit the description perfectly. Many medical experts who studied his portraits and his clothing measurements agreed that Marfan syndrome was a plausible diagnosis. The idea gained traction in the 1960s and 70s, when genetic conditions were becoming better understood. But there is a problem with this neat explanation. We have no direct evidence. There is no preserved DNA sample of Lincoln that could be tested with certainty. His bloodied clothes from the night of the assassination exist, and a lock of his hair survives, but these materials have not yielded definitive results. And some modern doctors argue that while Lincoln looked like he might have had Marfan syndrome, he did not show all the classic symptoms. For instance, people with Marfan often suffer from vision problems because the lenses of their eyes dislocate, yet Lincoln's eyesight, though not perfect, was never described as dramatically impaired. This has led some researchers to consider another possibility. In the late 20th century, a new theory emerged. Maybe Lincoln suffered from something even rarer, a condition known as multiple endocrine neoplasia type 2. This is a genetic syndrome that, like Marfan, produces a tall and thin body with elongated facial features. But it also brings other distinctive traits: thickened lips, growths on the tongue, and a higher risk of certain types of cancer, particularly thyroid cancer. Some scholars pointed to photographs of Lincoln showing slightly asymmetric lips and his gaunt face as signs of this disease. More intriguingly, relatives of Lincoln, on his mother's side, reportedly showed signs of the same condition. If true, this would mean Lincoln may have carried a genetic time bomb that could have cut his life short even if John Wilkes Booth had not pulled the trigger in 1865. Whether it was Marfan or Men 2B, the theory remains just that, a theory. But it paints a fascinating picture. Imagine Lincoln standing at the podium at Gettysburg or signing the Emancipation Proclamation, all the while knowing that something about his body set him apart, that he was not built like other men, that he might not live as long as others. Doctors of his day would have had no language to describe these conditions. To them, Lincoln was simply a tall, awkward man, But if they had suspected a genetic disorder, it is unlikely they would have made it public. In the 19th century, illness in a president was often hidden from view. Weakness was seen as a liability. And so, if Lincoln had a rare disease, it would have been quietly kept behind closed doors. But Lincoln's hidden struggles were not just physical, they were emotional as well. Throughout his life, he was haunted by what he himself called his melancholy. Today, historians and psychologists interpret that as clinical depression. Friends wrote about finding him sitting silently, lost in thought, or weeping alone. At times, he seemed so weighed down by despair that those close to him feared he might not endure. Yet somehow, he did endure. He managed to transform his private pain into public strength, channeling his sorrow into empathy and his grief into eloquent words. The sadness that never left him became the source of his profound speeches about suffering, sacrifice, and hope. This brings us to an even deeper layer of the secret illness. Perhaps Lincoln's greatest struggle was not with a syndrome of the body, but with the storms of the mind. In an age when mental health was barely understood, his depression would have been hidden just as much as any genetic disease. His doctors, and even his closest allies, likely saw it as a private matter, something to be managed quietly, away from the judgment of the public. Yet the weight of the Civil War pressed on him daily, and he carried not only the burden of the nation, but also the burden of his own internal battles. So, what does this all mean? It means that Abraham Lincoln was not just the strong and stoic leader captured in statues and textbooks. He was also a man whose body may have carried a rare genetic flaw, and whose mind wrestled with shadows he could never quite escape. And still, in spite of these hidden illnesses, or perhaps even because of them, he rose to meet the greatest challenge in American history. When you think about Lincoln, you think about a man defined by resilience, the tall figure that looks so unusual, the melancholy that seems so heavy. These may have been the very things that gave him the depth and compassion to guide a nation through civil war. Doctors never diagnosed Lincoln in life. They hid what they could not explain. And in the century and a half since his death, historians and physicians have debated what secrets his body and mind carried. Was it Marfan syndrome, quietly eroding his strength? Was multiple endocrine neoplasia, a silent cancerous threat waiting to emerge? Or was his true affliction the invisible one, depression that colored his every thought? We may never know for sure, but what we do know is that Lincoln's legacy was forged not in spite of these hidden struggles, but alongside them. His secret illness, whatever its name, reminds us that even the greatest figures in history are human, fragile, and vulnerable, and it makes his achievements all the more extraordinary. If you enjoyed uncovering this hidden side of history, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. There are many more untold stories waiting for you.